The flash from the camera explodes against the marble staircase, spraying white light across the foyer and burning the moment into my memory. I'm standing on the far edge of the lowest step, one shoulder, literally cut out of the frame, the crystal chandelier buzzing faintly above us like a swarm of trapped bees. The photographer lowers his camera and glances at my mother for direction, his fingers still resting on the cool metal of the shutter. "All right," Mom says, her voice smooth as the champagne in her hand. "Now let's do the one that really matters. Just the three of us." The room goes quiet in that strange way a party does when everyone is pretending not to listen. The scent of white lilies and expensive perfume hangs heavy in the air, mixing with the buttery smell of hors d'oeuvres drifting from the kitchen. My father steps up a few stairs without looking at me, the polished wood creaking softly under his Italian shoes. Lily moves to the center on instinct, her gold dress catching the light so hard it almost hurts to look at her. The photographer hesitates his camera strap, whispering against his jacket as he turns toward them. I stay where I am, one hand resting on the cool brass of the banister heartbeat thudding in my ears louder than the string quartet playing in the next room. No one tells me to move. No one asks me to stay. A couple of cousins shift their weight on the marble floor. I hear the faint clink of ice in a glass as someone takes a nervous sip. My mother smooths a stray strand of Lily's hair, her fingers gentle, familiar, practiced. "Perfect," she murmurs. "Our family." The word hits harder than the camera flash. Family, singular, complete, finished. The photographer lifts the camera again, the black lens focused on the three of them framed by all that polished stone and crystal. I can feel the chill seeping through the thin soles of my heels. The floor colder here at the edge than it is where they're standing in the center of the light. I don't step back. I don't step forward. I just stand there, watching as the man counts softly. 1, 2, and captures the portrait that will hang in their living room for the rest of their lives. A glossy reminder of exactly where I don't belong. Before we go on, tell me where you're listening from and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt overlooked by the people who should have cared for you. My name is Hannah Clark. I'm 33 years old, and on paper, my life looks pretty good. I run a tech company based out of Hartford, Connecticut. My days are filled with the glow of laptops, the low murmur of conference calls, and the steady click of my own keyboard as I answer emails long after the sun has slipped behind the city skyline. My apartment smells like strong coffee in the mornings and takeout in cardboard containers at night, and my phone buzzes more with investors than with family. People in my world call me Ms. Clark, in that respectful, slightly nervous tone that comes with knowing I signed their contracts. Back in the town where I grew up, though, I've never been Ms. Clark. I've just been Hannah, the older daughter, who somehow always ended up standing 3 steps to the left of the real picture. The Clarks are what people politely call comfortable. My parents live behind iron gates at the end of a long, winding drive lined with maple trees that turn blood red in October. Inside their house, you can smell money in the polished wood and lemon oil in the thick carpets that hush your footsteps in the way the air conditioning hums low and even, no matter how hot or cold it is outside. On holidays, the place fills with the sound of clinking glasses and careful laughter, the kind that never gets too loud because someone might think you've forgotten your manners. From as far back as I can remember, there was a quiet line running through that house. On one side of it was me. On the other side was my little sister, Lily. At Thanksgiving, when I was 9 and she was 6, I sat at the kids' table in the kitchen, my plastic chair sticking to the backs of my legs, while the dishwasher hummed and the smell of gravy and dish soap tangled in the air. Lily, in her frilly dress, sat between Mom and Dad at the big oak table in the dining room, under the crystal chandelier, giggling as my father carved the turkey. I remember hearing their muffled voices through the swinging door, my fork scraping against the cheap plate while my cousin tried to flick peas at me with his thumb. Christmas was no different. Lily's pile of presents always spilled out from under the tree, the crinkling of bright paper and the rustle of tissue sounding like its own kind of applause. My gifts fit neatly under a single branch wrapped in tasteful paper that matched the decor. When I was 15 and won a regional Young Entrepreneur Award for a little tutoring service I'd built, the plaque ended up on a shelf in my room that smelled faintly of dust and old textbooks. That same year, Lily's crooked watercolor of the house window's uneven sky, a strange shade of greenish blue, was framed in gold and hung right in the front hallway where the scent of furniture polish and fresh flowers greeted every guest. I learned early how to make myself useful instead of visible. While Lily floated in and out of piano lessons, horseback riding, and whatever other hobbies she'd picked up that month, I buried myself in borrowed business books that smelled like old paper and library glue. I drafted business plans at the kitchen table late at night, the overhead light flickering while the fridge hummed behind me. My father barely glanced at the pages before chuckling and telling me to leave business to the professionals and focus on getting into a good school. When Lily painted something new, Mom would tilt her head, eyes soft, and talk about raw talent as she found another place on the wall. When I brought home straight A's or debate trophies, there was always a distracted, "That's nice," Honey tossed over a shoulder while they checked on Lily's latest project. By the time their 35th wedding anniversary rolled around, I knew my role by heart. I drove up that tree-lined driveway in a quiet black sedan I'd bought myself, the tires crunching over fallen leaves, the chill of late October seeping through the glass. I'd chosen a charcoal pencil skirt and a deep wine-colored blouse, nice enough not to embarrass anyone, muted enough not to compete with Lily's inevitable sparkle. The moment I stepped out of the car, I could smell the faint trace of wood smoke from nearby chimneys, mixing with the sharp, clean scent of my own perfume as I straightened my jacket. Lily arrived in a silver sports car that purred to a stop behind me, her laughter already ringing out before she even closed the door. The front steps glowed with warm light, and when my parents opened the door, the air that rushed out was thick with the smell of lilies and expensive catering garlic butter, something sweet underneath. Their faces lit up for her first, my mother's voice smoothing into that soft tone she saves for delicate things. "There's our star," she said, her silk sleeve whispering against Lily's sequined dress as she pulled her in. My father wrapped Lily in a hug that lifted her heels right off the polished wood floor. For me, there was a quick pat on the shoulder, my father's cologne strong and familiar, but distant somehow, like a smell from another room. "Good to see you made it, Hannah," he said, already turning back toward Lily as the string quartet in the foyer played something soft and expensive that I didn't recognize. Inside the foyer shimmered with crystal and candles light bouncing off every glass surface until it felt almost too bright. In the dining room, a framed seating chart stood on an antique stand, the ink still smelling faintly of fresh print when I leaned in. My eyes traced the names gliding past senators and surgeons and family friends until I found myself Hannah Clark, table 14, back corner. Near the kitchen doors, I could already hear the muffled clatter of plates and the hiss of steam from the caterers behind that wall. Lily's name sat right up front at table 1 next to my parents, close enough to the band that she'd be in every candid photo. My mother appeared at my elbow just as I straightened up, the soft rustle of her dress brushing my arm. "We put you with some people who might be good for your career," she said, her eyes already scanning the crowd, the smell of her perfume blooming around us. "The Hendersons are always looking for tech people. You can network." I swallowed the familiar sting as the event planner glided up tablet in hand, her heels clicking sharply against the marble. "Mrs. Clark," she said, voice low but clear, in the high-ceilinged foyer. "I wanted to confirm family photos at 7:30. We'll start with the whole group, then the smaller shots." Mom's answer came effortlessly, like it had been rehearsed. "That's fine," she said, patting Lily's arm. "But make sure we get one with just the three of us, Charles, myself and Lily. That's the one we'll want enlarged for the living room." The clink of a passing server's tray sounded too loud in the silence that followed the glasses trembling faintly on the silver as he walked by. I felt my fingers tighten around the stem of the champagne flute someone had handed me, the cold glass slick under my palm. For a second, the chandelier lights blurred at the edges of my vision. I didn't know it yet, standing there in the middle of all that polished marble and soft music. But that single sentence, "the portrait for the living room without me," was the first crack in a wall I'd been leaning against my whole life. And before the night was over, that wall was going to come all the way down. The cafeteria clock ticked loud enough to drown out the chatter of fourth graders, each click a tiny hammer against the back of my skull. I remember standing there in my winter boots, the rubber soles squeaking against the linoleum as I clutched a paper bag that smelled faintly of peanut butter and apples. At the long table by the windows, where sunlight spilled over the formica like warm syrup, my mother sat with Lily on her lap. Lily's curls brushed Mom's cheek as she laughed softly, feeding her bites of chocolate cake, while the other parents gathered around them. I moved closer, the cold air still clinging to my coat, the zipper rattling lightly with each step. My mother didn't see me. Or she did, and it didn't matter. When I reached the table, she shifted her purse to the bench beside her, the leather brushing against my hip, creating a wall I wasn't meant to cross. "Sweetheart," she said to Lily, smoothing her dress hold still so I can get a picture of you with your friends. The camera clicked, capturing the light on her smile, the pink frosting on her fingers, the crowd that circled like she was the birthday girl, even though it wasn't her day at all. It was mine. I slid my paper bag onto the edge of the table, the sound barely louder than a breath. The only open seat was at the far end, next to the trash can, where the air always smelled faintly sour, and the metal lid thudded each time someone tossed in their milk carton. I sat anyway. I unwrapped my sandwich, slowly listening to the scrape of chairs, the hum of conversation, the distant shriek of recess whistles outside. Nobody sang for me. Nobody lit a candle or cut a slice of cake. My mother didn't turn once. When Lily finally looked over her shoulder, her mouth was full of frosting. She waved at me with a sticky hand. "Mom says we're going out for ice cream after school." She called, her voice bright over the noise. "You can come if you want." She didn't understand. Not then. A moment later, the bell rang, sharp and tinny, scattering the spell and sending everyone back to their classrooms. I gathered my bag and stood up the legs of my chair, scraping loudly across the floor, the only sound in that whole cafeteria that acknowledged I existed at all. Years later, I can still smell that sour trash can and the sweetness of Lily's cake mingling in the cold air. It took a long time to understand why that memory stayed sharp when others faded into background noise. The truth is, that was only one moment in a life full of quiet exclusions that shaped me long before I knew how to name them. I grew up in a house where the morning light always seemed to shine a little brighter on the side of the table where Lily sat. At breakfast, our mother would fuss over the temperature of Lily's oatmeal, blowing gently on each spoonful, while mine cooled untouched in its ceramic bowl. The silverware clinked softly as I stirred it, trying not to make too much noise, trying not to seem like I was asking for attention. The kitchen always smelled faintly of buttered toast and my father's strong coffee, but even that warmth didn't reach me most days. By the time I was old enough to recognize patterns, I had already learned to shrink myself in ways that no child should. I understood, without being told, that if I spoke too loudly, someone would glance toward Lily to make sure she was okay with the shift in focus. If I brought home a ribbon or certificate, it would be admired politely, then placed on the hallway table for later. Later rarely came. Meanwhile, Lily's drawings, uneven, bright, wild little things, were taped proudly to the refrigerator, so many that the magnets started to slip. My father wasn't unkind, but his kindness had a direction, a gravity, and Lily was at the center of it. When he talked to her, his voice softened, his eyes warmed, and he leaned forward slightly, the way people do when they're truly invested in what they're hearing. With me, he stayed upright, arms folded loosely, nodding absently, as though storing my words in a file he might get to someday. His cologne always smelled rich and woodsy, but when he hugged Lily, there was an extra note of comfort that wasn't there in the quick embraces he offered me. There were holidays that cut deeper than they should have. Christmas mornings where Lily's laughter filled the living room like the glow from the fireplace, while my gifts were stacked neatly in a small pile at one corner of the rug. I still remember the feel of that rug coarse under my palms as I sat cross-legged watching her rip through layer after layer of wrapping paper, the sound sharp and joyous. My own unwrapping was quiet, deliberate, like peeling back the edge of a secret I wasn't sure anyone cared to hear. On school nights, when the wind rattled the windows and the house settled into its nighttime creaks, I would sit at my desk with my textbooks spread out before me. The lamp cast a warm circle of light across the pages, the faint smell of graphite rising from my pencil as I worked through equations and essays. I studied hard because it was something I could control, something that felt like mine. But each A, each honor roll certificate, each teacher's praise seemed to vanish the moment I stepped back into that house where achievement was expected from me, but celebrated in Lily. My mother would say, "Good job, honey," without looking up from whatever she was doing. Her voice was calm, pleasant, but not warm, not in the way it was when she said Lily's name. That name floated through our home like music, bright, lyrical, meant to be heard. My own felt more like punctuation, functional and forgettable. If you asked me why I didn't speak up back then, why I didn't push back or demand equal treatment, I don't think I would have had an answer. The truth is, I was a child. Children take what they're given and assume it's the world. I assumed invisibility was simply the role I'd been assigned, and my job was to perform it gracefully. I became skilled at slipping into the background, at anticipating needs before anyone said them aloud, at being helpful without being seen. It wasn't that my parents disliked me. That's the kind of explanation adults try to paste over old wounds to make them neat. It's that they liked the version of me who didn't take up space. They liked my reliability, my quiet competence, my ability to smooth the edges of a day without demanding much in return. I was the steady one, the safe one, the one who never made things complicated. Lily, on the other hand, brought a kind of delightful chaos into every room she entered. She glowed, or at least that's how they described her. My father would ruffle her hair as she bounded into the kitchen on Saturday mornings, bare feet tapping lightly against the tile. "There's my sunshine," he'd say, his smile deepening. She'd wrap her arms around his waist, her laughter bright as the morning light that streamed through the windows. I watched from the table, stirring my cereal until it turned soft, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the low whir of the dishwasher. On those mornings, it felt like I was watching someone else's family through a pane of glass, close enough to hear, too far to touch. There were small moments, too, ones that might seem trivial to anyone who didn't grow up in that house. A birthday party, where all the candles were moved to Lily's side of the cake for the photo. A family vacation, where I was asked to switch seats so Lily could sit by the window because she likes the view. Little things that accumulated with the weight of pebbles in my pockets, not heavy enough to drown me, but enough to tire me as the years passed. By the time I reached high school, I had mastered the art of making myself valuable without asking for value in return. I volunteered for every school project that required quiet dedication. I spent hours in the library, the smell of books and old carpet mixing with the cool air from overhead vents. Teachers praised my work ethic, my organization, my determination. But when report cards arrived, my parents glanced at the grades with a nod before asking about Lily's extracurricular activities. I don't think they realized the effect of those glances, those tossed-off questions, those small disconnections that grew like thin cracks across the surface of our family. They didn't hear the way my voice softened over the years, or how I began to speak less because I couldn't bear the sound of my own words falling without an echo. They didn't notice how easily I gave up my place at the front of the line, or how often I settled for being the one behind the camera instead of in the picture. Silence became a sort of inheritance, one I never asked for but carried with me anyway. Lily didn't mean to overshadow me. Even as adults, when I watch her walk into a room, I can still see the girl who waved at me with frosting on her fingers, unaware that she was sitting in a spotlight that had never once been offered to me. That innocence doesn't erase the hurt, but it softens some corners of the past. She was a child soaking up affection because she needed it, not knowing it came at someone else's expense. But the adults they knew, or they should have. Parents are supposed to divide their love, not their children. Mine did the opposite. As the years went on, the imbalance didn't get better with age. It became more refined, more practiced. The compliments for me became quieter, the praise for Lily louder. When I achieved something significant, it was acknowledged in a way that felt administrative rather than emotional. A quick nod, a polite smile, "That's nice, dear," that held no lasting energy. But when Lily completed even the smallest task, the room brightened as though someone had opened a window and let fresh air rush in. I told myself for a long time that this was simply the dynamic of our family. I convinced myself that being dependable was its own kind of value even if it didn't come with applause. I poured myself into work, into achievements, into creating a life outside the boundaries of their attention. Yet every triumph, no matter how large, felt strangely unfinished, like a song missing its last note. It wasn't until I walked into my parents' anniversary party that I understood how deep those roots went. The way my breath caught in my throat when I saw where they'd seated me. The way my mother's voice softened around Lily's name and sharpened when she said mine. The way every guest instinctively turned toward my sister as though she were the axis around which the evening spun. These weren't new wounds. They were old ones, reopening under the bright chandelier lights and polished marble floors. And somewhere in that shimmer and noise, I felt a shift, a quiet, almost imperceptible tug, as though something long buried was about to rise back into the light. I didn't know then what I was about to find, or how one discovery would unravel everything I thought I understood about my place in that family. But the air around me had changed, charged with a tension I couldn't name yet. Something was waiting, and I was about to walk straight into it. The envelope slid out from between the pages with a soft whisper, the brittle paper brushing against my thumb as it hit the lavender duvet. For a moment, I just stared at it, the dim hallway light spilling across the bed in a pale stripe. My name, Hannah, was written in handwriting I hadn't seen in years, the ink slightly faded, the loops familiar enough to twist something deep in my chest. I broke the wax seal with my nail, the crack sharp in the quiet room. A faint scent of old paper drifted up as I unfolded the letter, my hands trembling against the worn edges. The first line blurred before I even reached the second. My Hannah, if you're reading this, the weight has finally become too heavy. Footsteps echoed down the hallway, muffled laughter from downstairs, the murmur of distant music. But in that room, everything stopped. The words on the page grew darker, clearer, heavier. There is an account in your name only. My breath caught. Arrangements made so you would not be left behind. My pulse hammered beneath my skin. The truth was lying open on my lap, as stark and undeniable as the lavender walls surrounding me, my sister's lavender, not mine. And then the line that shattered something quiet inside me. You are my true heir and spirit. I didn't realize I was crying until a tear hit the paper, spreading into the fibers like a living thing. It took a long moment before I could even breathe again. I had always known my grandmother saw me differently, but I never imagined she had acted on it, let alone hidden something this significant in a place only I would ever look. I sat there for a beat, my fingers tracing the edge of the letter as the truth rearranged itself in my mind, like puzzle pieces finally clicking together. The lavender room around me felt suddenly foreign, as though I'd stepped into a photograph of someone else's life. The light from the hallway cast a long, narrow shadow across the carpet, stretching toward the corner where the cardboard box sat. My box. The one stuffed with everything I'd ever accomplished, tucked away like it was clutter. I could almost hear the faint scratch of cardboard against the floor as I dragged it open earlier. When I'd lifted my diplomas from inside, still in their original sleeves, smelling faintly of basement air, I'd told myself it was just carelessness, that they hadn't meant anything by it. But Grandma's letter changed the temperature of the room. It made the air feel heavier, thicker, filled with a truth I couldn't ignore anymore. As I reread the words, each sentence revealed a new crack in the version of my childhood I'd tried so hard to rationalize. This wasn't just about being overlooked or seated at the wrong table. This was something older, deeper. Something my grandmother had seen long before I ever understood it myself. Her handwriting wavered. In places her hand must have trembled, though she would have hated admitting such frailty. She'd always smelled faintly of gardenias and old books, her sweater sleeves soft from years of wear. The letter carried that quiet strength wrapped in the certainty of someone who had witnessed the truth with clear eyes. She had known. She had watched. And she had prepared for what she knew I would one day discover. In the dim light of that lavender room, an ache spread through my chest, not from sadness, but from recognition. I had spent my entire life trying to believe the imbalance in our family was accidental, circumstantial, the natural rhythm of parents and children. But here in my hands was proof that someone outside the immediate circle had seen the pattern clearly enough to act on it, to protect me, to leave me something that belonged only to me. I folded the letter carefully, the paper warm now from my touch. Each crease lined up with the next, the sound soft and deliberate. It felt like closing a door I didn't know I had the right to walk through. The account she mentioned, where was it? What was in it? Why had my parents never told me? And how long had they known? The questions filtered through me like slow, cold rain, seeping into every corner of my thoughts. I slipped the letter into my purse, the leather cool beneath my fingertips. The room smelled faintly of Lily's perfume, floral sweet, overwhelming, and something about it made my stomach twist. As I headed toward the doorway, the carpet muffled my footsteps, but the house felt louder than ever. Laughter floated up from downstairs, warm and careless, while my pulse beat a steady, determined rhythm in my ears. The photograph on the hallway wall caught my eye. My high school graduation, all of us standing together, though my parents were turned slightly toward Lily. Even then, I felt suddenly, unmistakably awake. I made my way downstairs with a calm I didn't yet understand. The chandelier above the foyer shimmered softly, scattering light across polished wood, and the faint scent of champagne lingering in the air. My shoes clicked lightly on the stairs, each sound echoing like a countdown. Somewhere in the crowd near the French doors leading to the garden stood Mr. Abrams, my parents' financial advisor. His salt and pepper hair glinted under the soft lighting, and he held a glass of champagne like he didn't trust it in his hand for too long. He always did, that held things with a kind of gentle caution. I approached him quietly, the soft hum of voices around us thinning as I drew near. He looked up puzzled at first, then something shifted in his expression. Recognition, then something like unease. "Mr. Abrams," I said, adjusting the strap of my purse. The leather brushed against my blouse with a faint whisper. "There's something we need to discuss." His eyebrows lifted, and he glanced subtly over my shoulder toward my parents. A habit, I realized, one I'd seen before without understanding it. "Of course," he said softly. "Is everything all right?" I held out my business card, thin, crisp, embossed with my name. Hannah Clark, CEO. His eyes flicked over the letters, and something sharpened in his posture. He slipped the card into the inside pocket of his jacket, the fabric rustling softly. "We should schedule a meeting," I continued, lifting my chin just slightly. I believe my grandmother may have left arrangements in my name, ones I wasn't informed about. For just a moment, one brief, unguarded heartbeat, his face betrayed him. A flicker of recognition. And guilt. My stomach tightened. "So you do know?" He hesitated, his breath catching almost imperceptibly. "I am not at liberty to discuss details here. Then we'll discuss them privately." The silence between us stretched, the ambient noise of the party feeling strangely muted. The faint clinking of cutlery, the swirl of perfume and candle wax, the low hum of conversation, all of it faded as he gave a small, reluctant nod. And in that nod, everything fell into place. The missing documents, the unanswered questions, the way my parents had handled my grandmother's belongings, the reason I'd never heard about any arrangements. They knew. They had known for years, and they had kept it from me. The truth flooded me in waves, slow, heavy, unstoppable. This wasn't neglect. It wasn't accidental oversight. It wasn't forgetfulness or the natural dynamics of a family with an energetic younger child. It was intentional, deliberate, a pattern of erasure old enough for my grandmother to see it clearly and act accordingly before she died. Standing there in the warm glow of the chandelier, I felt something shift deep inside me. The part of me that had stayed quiet out of habit began to unlearn its silence. I wasn't a child anymore, sitting by a trash can with a paper lunch bag. I wasn't the daughter who waited for praise that never came. I wasn't the family shadow. I was the woman my grandmother had written to the woman she believed I would become. The air felt sharper as I walked away from Mr. Abrams, the hem of my blouse brushing lightly against my skin with each step. I could hear Lily's laughter drifting from the other side of the room, bright and thoughtless, while my mother's voice floated above the crowd like polished silver. None of it mattered. Not anymore. Tonight, I'd discovered the truth. Tomorrow, I would do something about it. And for the first time in my life, I knew exactly where to begin. My voice cut through the restaurant's low hum before I even realized I'd stood. "I think we should begin with this." The folder in my hands hit the glass tabletop with a soft, decisive thud that carried far beyond our small corner. Silverware stilled. Chairs stopped mid-shift. Even the waiter, balancing a tray of water glasses, froze as the sound echoed against the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river. My father's jaw tightened. My mother's fingers curled around her napkin, twisting it slightly, the linen whispering under her grip. Lily's breath hitched as I flipped the folder open, the overhead lights catching the polished edge of the documents inside. I slid the first paper toward my parents, the crisp page skimming across the glass like a blade. My father's Scotch glass trembled just enough for the ice to clink. "Explain this," I said, my voice steady, in a way I had never heard before. The air around our table tightened, growing still. The restaurant noise dimmed, as if someone had lowered a dial. My mother reached for the document, her pearl bracelet clattering softly, a single bead tapping against her water glass. Her eyes scanned the page and then widened, her face drained of color. My father swallowed hard. Across the table, Lily whispered, "What is that?" But I wasn't speaking to her. Not yet. And this moment, this quiet, tremulous second, where everything hung between what was known and what was about to be known, was where the ground finally shifted. But to understand how we reached this point, I need to take you back to the hours that led here. To the choice I made the moment I read my grandmother's letter. I hadn't slept much after leaving the anniversary party. The city lights outside my apartment flickered against the windows, casting shifting rectangles across the hardwood floor, as I spread the folder open at my kitchen table. The faint scent of coffee lingered from a pot I'd brewed, but never drank. My grandmother's letter lay beside my laptop like an old knowing witness. I traced the wax seal again, feeling the indentation of her initial beneath my thumb, grounding myself in its quiet certainty. Then I opened my financial records. Then the ones she'd mentioned. Then the ones I had to fight to access. By sunrise, the truth sat in front of me, cold, undeniable, and far uglier than I'd expected. Money meant for me. Instructions meant for me. Decisions meant for me. Redirected, moved, altered, hidden. My parents hadn't simply forgotten the account my grandmother set aside for me. They had rerouted it, accessed it, used it, and they had used me to do it. By the time I arrived at the restaurant for our so-called emergency family meeting, the only thing left inside me was clarity. Melissa, my assistant, sat to my right, as planned, her presence steady and calm. The folder rested between us, cool beneath my palm. I waited until the drinks arrived, until my parents' subtle theatrics had played out my mother's disappointment, my father's restrained fury, Lily's well-timed tears. I let them perform the parts they had rehearsed for years. Then I ended the play. Back in the moment, in the present, my father reached for the document with 2 fingers as though touching it pained him. His voice emerged low and controlled. "Where did you get this?" "The bank," I replied quietly. "The one where Grandma established an account in my name. The one you never told me about." My mother pressed her lips together, the color draining from them. "Hannah, you don't understand." I leaned forward, the faint citrus scent of my perfume mixing with the warm aroma of baked bread drifting from a nearby table. "Oh, I understand perfectly. What I want is for you to explain to me why my grandmother set aside money for my future, and why within a month of her funeral, you transferred it into an account with Lily's name on it." Across the table, Lily jerked, like someone had pulled a wire inside her. "What, Mom?" "Dad, I didn't know." My father shot her a warning look, the kind that had silenced both of us as kids. She shrank back instinctively, her dress rustling against the leather seat. The sound felt oddly loud. "Sit down, Lily," he murmured. She was already sitting. He just didn't want her speaking. My mother reached for the paper again, her fingers trembling. The faint scent of her rosewater hand cream drifted across the table. "This is being blown out of proportion." I lifted another document, this one bearing signatures. "Then maybe you can explain this too." I slid it toward them, the paper making that soft, sharp sound against glass that felt like a match being struck. My mother didn't touch it. My father did. Barely. His brows furrowed. "This is nonsense. I never signed." He stopped. His eyes narrowed. He recognized the signature, but it wasn't his. Not really. It was his handwriting, his name, his letters. But the loops were wrong. The pressure, inconsistent. The slant, unfamiliar. "I know," I said softly. "You didn't sign it. Mom did." His head snapped toward her, the movement sharp enough that his chair creaked. My mother's breath hitched just once, her chest rising as if she'd been plunged into cold water. Margaret wanted both girls to have... No! I cut in, my voice steady but quiet. Grandma left very specific instructions, and you had access to her mail before I did. A murmur rose from the neighboring table. Someone's fork clinked loudly against a plate. The room was no longer pretending not to listen. My mother's eyes glistened not with sadness, but with that thin sheen of panic she'd always masked with elegance. "Hannah, your grandmother was confused near the end. She meant well, but she wasn't thinking clearly." My chest tightened, but not with hurt, with something steadier, stronger. She was clear enough to put everything in writing, clear enough to entrust it to a banker, because she didn't trust you to do the right thing. My father's shoulders stiffened. "We raised you. We supported." I slid the third paper across the table. "And is this your idea of support?" He stared down at it, a statement of withdrawal. 2 years after my grandmother died, labeled Clark Household Expense, signed under my name. Except it wasn't my signature. It wasn't even close. A soft gasp came from Lily's side of the table. When I looked at her, her face had gone pale beneath her makeup. "You used her name?" she whispered to my parents. "You used her identity," my mother's voice sharpened. "Lower your voice, Lily." "No," I said, still calm. "Let her speak." She didn't know. She wasn't part of this. My father's jaw flexed, the muscles tightening like he was fighting words he didn't want escaping. "You are blowing this out of proportion." I leaned back slightly, letting the cold stem of my water glass anchor me. "You forged my signature to access money that wasn't yours. Money Grandma left for me. Her journals, her letters. The trust she created, all of it redirected, and you hid every trace." My mother flinched, not dramatically, just enough to betray that she knew there was no path back from this moment. And then came the twist I hadn't expected, not from them, but from beside me. Lily exhaled shakily, then reached into her purse. The leather creaked softly in the quiet. "I think you should see this," she said, her voice trembling. She slid her phone across the table. A screenshot, an email, from my mother, sent to her. The subject line, "Do not tell Hannah." The body, "If she finds out about the account, it will complicate things. Just say you never heard of it." My father's face drained. My mother went utterly still. The restaurant fell silent around us, save for the gentle hum of the heating vents overhead and the faint clatter of dishes being cleared somewhere far away. I turned slowly toward Lily. She looked stricken, her eyes wide, her lower lip trembling as though she'd discovered her own betrayal in the process of revealing mine. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I swear, Hannah, I never read the whole. I didn't think it mattered." For the first time in my life, I believed her. My mother opened her mouth, but whatever defense she had planned died before it reached her lips. There was no script for this moment. No elegant wording to smooth the jagged edges of the truth. I gathered the documents, calmly sliding each page back into the folder. The paper made a soft rustle like dry leaves shifting in an autumn breeze. "This," I said, lifting my eyes to meet theirs, is the last time I'm explaining myself to people who see me only when they need something. My chair scraped lightly against the floor as I stood, the sound impossibly loud in the stillness. If you want a relationship with me, it will be honest, equal, and without manipulation. But you no longer have access to my life simply because we share a name. My mother's voice cracked. Hannah, don't walk out. My father's hand slammed against the table. Sit down. I didn't. I stepped back from the table, the soft glow of the afternoon sun catching the edge of my blouse, warming the fabric against my skin. Lily lifted her hand as if to reach for me, her fingers hovering inches above the air. But she didn't touch. Goodbye, I said quietly. Not angrily. Not bitterly. Just finally. And as I turned toward the elevator, the room behind me fell into a stunned silence so complete I could hear nothing but the steady rhythm of my own footsteps, leading me somewhere I should have walked years ago. When the elevator doors closed, the echo of my father's palm hitting the table was still vibrating somewhere in my bones. The quiet inside that metal box felt almost holy, a sealed moment suspended between the life I'd been handed and the one I was finally choosing. As the elevator glided downward, the soft hum of its machinery replaced the memory of raised voices, and for the first time in years, my breath didn't catch halfway up my chest. Outside, the early evening air wrapped around me like a cool cloth, steadying the places inside me that had been trembling. The river below shimmered in the fading light, each ripple catching what little sun remained, as if the world itself had exhaled. By the time I reached my car, something had shifted quietly, firmly like a door I hadn't known was locked, easing open. Driving home, the city lights felt softer, the roads familiar in a way they hadn't in years, and I realized that nothing outside had changed. Only me. Over the next week, I moved through my days with a clarity sharp enough to feel like a second spine. The confrontation had peeled something away, a layer of denial, a long-held ache, the quiet hope that someday they might see me. Without that weight pressing against my ribs, I saw my grandmother's letter, not as a secret she'd left behind, but as an invitation. So the first thing I reclaimed was her. I met with the bank manager, the same man who had handled my grandmother's affairs. His office smelled faintly of old carpet and cedar, and the leather of his chair creaked as he sat. When he slid the box across the desk, a small, heavy thing wrapped in cloth, I felt a warmth spread across my palms as I lifted it. Inside were her journals filled with her looping handwriting, the ink still dark, the pages smelling of lavender and worn time. Bringing them home felt like carrying a part of her I had lost too soon. I spent that first night reading her words aloud in my living room, the soft lamplight flickering against the walls, while her voice steady, practical, quietly fierce, filled the space she never lived to see. She wrote about strength, about choices, about the quiet responsibility of becoming yourself. And somewhere between those pages, I found the steadiness I needed to decide what came next. I reclaimed something else too, something far less poetic, but no less healing. My parents had decided to auction the old mahogany dining table earlier that month, the one that had anchored every major holiday of our family's life, the one where I sat at the far end, barely visible in photographs. When I walked into the auction house, the table was displayed beneath soft golden lights. I ran my hand along its polished surface. The wood felt warm under my fingertips, familiar in ways that made my throat tighten. I bought it without hesitation, not to relive old memories, but to rewrite the meaning of that table entirely. When it was delivered, The movers set it in my dining room, the morning light spilling across its surface. I spent the rest of the day polishing it, wiping down every inch until my reflection stared back at me in the varnish. There was something deeply grounding in the motion, the slow circles, the faint scent of lemon oil, the rhythm of cloth against wood. It felt like clearing away decades of dust that didn't belong to me. And in that quiet work, I felt myself return. My parents didn't call. Not for days. Then a week. Then 2. I let the silence stay. Boundaries aren't walls. They're doors with locks that open only from one side. I wasn't shutting them out forever, but I was finally choosing when and if to let them in. Lily texted once a short message asking if I was okay. There was no apology attached, no justification, just a question shaped like genuine concern. I answered honestly, "I'm doing better." She replied with a simple heart. It was small, but it felt real. Meanwhile, the people who had stood by me long before any of this, they stepped forward without being asked. One evening, James showed up outside my apartment with 2 lattes and a folder under his arm. The hallway smelled faintly of fresh paint, and someone's cooking down the hall. "Thought you might want company," he said, his tone gentle, not probing. We sat at the table, my grandmother's table now, and talked about everything except the confrontation. Work, the mentorship program, a new contract coming in from Boston. The warm hum of the city drifted through the open window as the night settled around us. It wasn't that he avoided the subject. He just knew I needed a moment of normalcy more than a rehashing of wounds. Another night, my team surprised me with a small gathering at a wine bar downtown. Soft music floated through the dim space, the smell of oak barrels lingering in the air. They raised glasses not to my company's success, but to something more personal, the strength it took to break a silence that had shaped most of my life. Their kindness didn't feel like a celebration. It felt like a homecoming. As winter edged toward spring, I found myself drawn to the quiet. On weekends, I painted my second bedroom, a soft shade of green, the color my childhood room used to be before it was overtaken by lavender and pageant crowns. The bristles of the roller left neat, clean strokes across the wall, the fresh scent of paint filling the air as sunlight streamed in through the blinds. When the room was finished, I sat on the floor and let the stillness settle around me. It felt like reclaiming a part of the girl I used to be, the one who'd read books by the window and dared to dream big in the margins of her notebooks. One morning, months after the confrontation, I carried a small pot of rosemary out onto my balcony. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain from earlier storms. Rosemary was my grandmother's favorite. She used to rub a leaf between her fingers, inhale deeply, and say it reminded her of resilience. I placed the pot on the ledge, pressed my fingers gently into the damp soil, and whispered, "We're finally here." It wasn't for her. It was for me. Life didn't become perfect. Nothing ever does. My parents sent short emails from time to time, careful tentative messages that hovered between apology and obligation. I responded politely, but not deeply. Healing doesn't require erasing the past, just refusing to live in it. And slowly, my world reshaped itself. I built my days around people who saw me. I rooted my work in honesty and intention. I filled my home with laughter and voices that didn't silence my own. But the biggest shift wasn't external. It lived in the quiet moments when I brewed coffee before sunrise, or when I stepped into my office and saw my grandmother's letter framed on the wall. The world felt steadier, my place in it more defined. The ache of invisibility, once constant, had softened into something quieter, almost distant, like remembering an old injury that no longer hurt, only informed. On the night the mentorship program awarded its first scholarship, I stood at the head of the long mahogany table, candles flickering gently, casting warm light across faces I trusted. Conversation filled the room, soft, genuine, unforced. This was the family I had built. Not from blood, but from truth. As I lifted my glass, I caught my reflection in the window, the city lights glowing behind me, and felt something settle into place. Not triumph, not revenge, something calmer, more enduring. A kind of peace that comes only when you finally understand your worth was never meant to be proven to people who couldn't see it. In the end, the greatest freedom wasn't walking away from the table where I'd never been wanted. It was taking my place fully confidently at the one I built for myself.